Have you ever known someone, and maybe this has been you at some point, where you went through a difficult time and you almost felt like giving up on God? Have you ever known someone like that maybe they go to church for 3 months and then they lose their job, their plumbing backs up, and their girlfriend breaks up. And they're like, I tried the Jesus thing and it doesn't work, right? And it's almost like a bad country song, right? Like my plumbing backed up, my girlfriend broke up, and I crashed my pickup truck. But we've all been there. We've known people like that. And what we're doing throughout the series is we're looking at some things that I wish Jesus would have said, but maybe he didn't say. Because the words of Jesus are incredibly powerful. They're transformational. It's the reason that every week when we come together, the message and the worship and all that we do is centered on the words of Jesus, because they're life-changing. But sometimes we get so used to the words of Jesus that we take them for granted, or we don't fully appreciate what he says. So throughout this series, we're looking at things that he didn't say, that we wish he would have said. It would have been nice if he would have said them. I would have liked for him to say these, but he didn't say them. And so here's a few as we jump in to introduce this topic today. He never said this. He never said, whoever does the will of my Father will always get the best parking spots. There's times where I wish he would have said that, because I have to park really far away. He never said, if you lose your life for my sake, you will never be without a job. Right? And some of you are in job transitions right now. It's like, man, I wish he would have said that. He never said, but seek first the kingdom of God, and you will never get a zit before prom or before the big date. I mean, the real question with that is, do you pop or not? And if you're a Dr. Pimple Popper fan, of course you pop. Right? I won't make you raise your hand if you are. Jesus never said, you won't have bad days. Didn't say that. He actually said some things that were very different from that. And we're going to jump into a conversation that he's having in John, which is one of the first books in the New Testament, John chapter 16. He's having a conversation with his disciples, and the disciples of Jesus were just his friends. These were his closest confidants. These were people he did ministry with. These were the people that he was going to entrust his ministry when he left. These were the people that were going to advance the kingdom and build the early church. And so what he says to them, and especially this is towards the end of his time on earth, what he says to them is incredibly important when it comes to this idea of having bad days and the struggles and the challenges that we face on this earth. And so we're going to jump right into the middle of this conversation. In John 16, verse 20, he says, very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. Now notice he's not saying, you're going to rejoice and you'll always be happy. No, what's he say? He says you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. Now, in this upcoming conversation and speech and prayer that he is going to use the word world 19 times. And he's going to compare and contrast how things are in the world and how things are in him. And for example, he's going to say some things like, peace I give to you, but I do not give to you as the world gives. I came from the Father to the world, and I'm leaving the world to go back to the Father. He was going to say, if the world hates you, I want you to remember that the world first hated me. If you belong to the world, then you would love it as your own, but you don't belong to the world. And even when he prays, he's going to pray, Father, don't take them out of the world. Even though we live in the world, we're not of this world. And so he's going to talk about the world where we live and what we experience every day. He's going to talk about that a lot. So here's what he says. He says, very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. And then he gives this sermon illustration. He says, a woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, but when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. Now, I have 3 adopted kids, and so I've never firsthand been through the experience of watching my wife give birth. But I've heard about it from a lot of people. My best friend from college, he actually has 11 kids. 3 of them adopted, 3 of them adopted, but 8 biological. So he's been through this 8 times. And a couple of them, his wife actually chose to do it the natural way, so no epidural, which blows my mind. Like, God's given us brains and wisdom and doctors and medicine came from that, like use the painkiller. I'm just incredibly thankful God didn't entrust, childbirth to guys. Like, I think the human race would have ended a long time ago. Yeah, thank you. But as I've understood, and especially when you do it without the epidural, like I've heard that, like the first 30 seconds of the experience is great. But then the pain sets in. And then it's the suffering, and there's the screaming, and the gritting of teeth, and the squeezing of a hand, and the yelling. He's like, sometimes it's like she yells at me. It's like, you did this to me, right? Like it's the grief, or not the grieving, but the pain and the suffering and the struggle is real. Another friend here, actually at our church, she was telling me she did a natural birth, and she was in labor over 20 hours. And she said at like hour 20, her husband looks at her after these 20 hours, and he's like, I'm really tired. Yeah. Things you don't say to your wife in labor. Now there's in the 20th hour, exactly. So, but what happens? You go through that entire experience, and the baby is born. And then there's the bliss of holding the newborn baby. All of the grief, all of the pain, all the struggle, all the challenge goes away. And your grief is turned to joy. And I've never heard a newborn, mom of a newborn child or a father say, you know what, it wasn't worth it. They say what? It was totally worth it. And that's what Jesus is talking about. He's saying you're going to weep, you're going to mourn, there's going to be bad days, but your grief will turn into joy. Verse 22, so with you, now is your time of grief. For some of you today, now you're in a season of grief. But I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take your joy away. Fast forward a few more verses to verse 33. He explains why he's given this message to them. He says this. He says, I've told you these things so that in me, in Christ, in my presence, in Jesus, you may have peace. Now notice he doesn't say here, right? He doesn't say you're never going to have pain. He doesn't say the sun's always going to shine. He doesn't say you're going to crush it. He doesn't say, you go own it, you go girl, right? He doesn't say those things. He doesn't say it's always going to be easy or the wind's always going to be at your back. No, what's he say? He says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. Suffering is inevitable. That's what he's saying. And someone here right now needs to hear this. You failed at something. You've lost your confidence. You've gotten laid off. Maybe you got rejected for a new job or an interview. You're going through a health crisis. You're dealing with some financial struggle. Maybe you're just in the midst of depression and anxiety and this cloud mentally that you find yourself in. Maybe you're in a season right now where there's just extreme tension in your marriage or a strain between you and your child. Maybe your best friend has betrayed you or let you down in some way. And you're going through this, and you're tempted to give up, and you're crying out, and you're wondering, where are you, God? And then you hear that Jesus says, in this world, you're going to have pain. Pain's a promise. Struggle's certain. Suffering is inevitable. Welcome to Vineyard Life Church, where we make you feel good about yourself. If you're in the midst of that right now, you're like, man, Scott, I could have stayed home and felt this bad. Right? Like, thanks for making me feel good. But what Jesus wants you to know is he wants you to know that he knows where you're at. He knows what you're going through. And he wants you to know, and this is where we're going to shift the focus in the rest of our time, is that your pain is not wasted. Your pain hasn't caught God off guard, but your pain actually can have a purpose. And I want to focus on two different ways that your pain can have a purpose, that God can use your pain in your life. And the first one is this, is that pain proves your faith. Pain proves your faith. Peter was a leader in the early church, and he wrote some of the New Testament. He wrote some letters called his epistles, and he was writing, when he wrote them, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, when he wrote them, it was about 60, 65 AD. And so this is a time of difficulty for Christians. Like, we sometimes think as Christians we have it bad in our country, or that we're persecuted, or that people are against us. But what you've got to understand is that this season was one of the most difficult times Christians had ever faced up until this point. the Roman emperor, Emperor Nero, he hated Christians. And he would do horrendous things that it cringes even as I think about it or describe it. But he would kill animals. He would catch animals and kill them, and then he'd skin them. And then he'd wrap the skins around Christians, and he'd sew them up, and then he'd let dogs loose and cheer on as the dogs would eat the Christians alive. He would host parties at his palace, and he would take Christians, and he would tie them to a tree. He would pour wax on them, and he'd light them on fire. And then he'd entertain his guests to the screams of these human torches as these Christians would burn. And so it's in that context that Peter pens these words. He says, be truly glad. There's wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. When they would have heard those words, you must endure many trials for a little while, you know what they would have thought of? They would have thought about the friend that was executed by Nero. They would have thought about how if it becomes public knowledge that they're a Christian, or if they get caught, they may become one of those human torches. And it's in the midst of that Peter is bold enough where he says, so be truly glad. There's wonderful joy ahead, even though you're enduring many trials for a little while. Then he says this, he says, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. Now, when I read that, it makes me think that, well, is there a non-genuine faith? Is there a counterfeit faith? Counterfeit faith is faith that looks right on the outside, right? It looks good on the outside, but on the inside, it doesn't go deep. I think about counterfeit faith, and I think for a significant part of my life, I had that, right? I would go to church sometimes. I would do the right things. I had good values. I had good ethics. I called myself a Christian. Other people would look at me, and they would say, he's a Christian. But it was nothing more than a label. I mean, it was like I graduated from Plainfield High School, and we were the fighting Quakers. So I'd call myself a fighting Quaker. I went to college. I was a computer science major, and so I would call myself a CS major. I was in a fraternity, and so I had that label. And so I had all these labels, and Christianity was just another label for me. It didn't really impact how I lived my life. It didn't really impact how I made decisions or how I chose to spend my time or the values or how I spent my money. Right? It was just a label. And one of my fears is we live in such a comfortable culture in our Western context is that there's a lot of Christians, there's a lot of people in churches today, there's probably people here in this church today, in this service, that have a counterfeit faith. And I don't want that for you. And I don't want that for you. And Peter says that when we go through trials and difficulties, one of the things it does is it proves our faith. Does that describe you? Do you have a counterfeit faith? Are you someone that likes that maybe you go to church because it's expected of you? Maybe you go to church because it's kind of what you've always done and it's a tradition. Maybe you just like being known as a Christian. Maybe you go because you like the people you're around, like you have some friends. Maybe you care about justice and social justice and making a difference in the world, and it's like, man, the church does those things, and I like being a part of that. I like helping people. But on the inside, your faith doesn't go deep. Does that describe you? And see, the challenge is that person I started the service with, that person that tries God for a while, and then when things get hard, they walk away or they drift away. That's a counterfeit faith. It's like, no, I tried the Jesus thing. Jesus tells a story about this farmer who's sowing some seed, and he gives some different examples of where that seed falls and how it grows up. And one of the things he says is, there's some seed that falls among thorns. And the seed that falls among thorns, it's like the worries and the hardships of this world, it strangles out the seed, and it strangles out the plant as it starts to grow, and so it never bears fruit. And then he talks about other seed that falls on shallow ground, and it sprouts up quickly, but it never really becomes a mature plant because why? Because it's very shallow and it doesn't have deep roots. Does that describe your faith? We've all known people that they get rejected for a new job, and the conclusion they jump to is God's not real. Or they deal with a chronic health issue. Maybe it's migraines or something else, and it's like, man, God just doesn't heal, right? Their husband leaves them, and so they just jump to the conclusion, well, God doesn't care. A loved one dies of cancer. Oh, well, you can't trust God. Someone goes through financial hardship, and they jump to the conclusion, God doesn't love me. Now, you see, trouble and hardship, they don't negate your faith. They actually prove your faith. It's in those difficult times when you realize that you have a genuine faith and your roots go deep. You know it's real, right? Listen to this. A faith that has been tested is a faith that can be trusted. A faith that has been tested is a faith that can be trusted. It's just like marriage. Courtney and I, we got married a long time ago. But I remember when we got married, the first few weeks, the first few months were awesome. Like everything was perfect. And it was like we have a great marriage. But I didn't really know how strong our relationship and our marriage was. When do you know? Well, you know when you go through difficulty. I know when I make some stupid decision, knucklehead decision, and she still stands beside me, right? You know when you're confronted with the other person's weakness and you choose to love them regardless of what you're seeing in them or regardless of what they're saying with you. You choose to stand with them. You choose to hold arms together. You choose to be together. You know when you're going through difficulty and your world is rocked, but you get through it together. Because when your marriage is tested, then you know how strong your relationship is. You know it can be trusted, and your faith is the same way. A faith that has been tested is a faith that can be trusted. And I've heard people say things like, and you've heard people say things like this. They go through an extremely difficult situation, a dark season, but they make it through. And they look back and they say, you know what? I saw God work in ways that I've never seen before. Right? They get through it and they say, you know what? I am closer to God now than I've ever been in my entire life. I am more connected with God now than ever before. Why? Because their faith was tested. The pain proves your faith. You see God show up in the midst of difficulties in ways that you don't see him show up when things are good and things are easy. Pain proves your faith. The second thing pain does is pain prepares you for purpose. Ease and comfort never made me stronger. Like, let's say I told you, because I'm wanting to impress you, that I go to the gym 2 hours a day every day of the week. You'd be like, wow, he must be in good shape. Well, what if I told you I go to the gym 2 hours every day, and what I do is I actually sit on the couch and listen to Spotify? You'd be like, you're probably getting less healthy going to the gym every day. No, what do you do when you go to the gym? Or if you're going through conditioning, or if you're doing a workout, what do? You lift, right? You're facing resistance. The resistance builds resilience, but you're facing resistance, right? And literally what that's doing to your muscles as you lift weight is it tears the muscles, and then when they rebuild, they build back stronger and they build back bigger. That's how you guys get your six-pack abs, right? But you lift, or cardio, you run, you push your heart, you strain yourself, you step out of your comfort zone, you push yourself to challenge yourself and do something hard. Why? So you can get healthier, so you can get stronger. Because ease and comfort don't make us better, but struggle does. And just like working out, it's that way with our faith. Pain prepares you for your purpose. James talks about this process. And I want to read you a few words from James. Here's what I want you to do. Just close your eyes. Okay? Just close your eyes. And if you are in the midst of a difficult place right now, I want you to hear these words from James as if they are being spoken by God directly to you. I want you to imagine that no one else is in this room, but God is speaking directly to you. Here's what I believe God would say to you. He would say, I want you to consider it pure joy, that as you face trials of many kinds, consider it pure joy, because I want you to know that the testing of your faith, this testing is going to produce perseverance. And I want you to let perseverance finish its work, because I want you to be mature. I want you to be complete. I don't want you to lack anything. Pain prepares you for purpose. As you can open your eyes, or if you're comfortable, just keep your eyes closed and take a little nap. Might be the most spiritual thing you could do, But, praise and compliments. I love praise and compliments. I like it when people say nice things to me or nice things about me. But really, they've never made me stronger. They make me feel good, but they don't really make me better. Last week, someone was critical of something I did, and we've been having a conversation via email back and forth about it, and it's been really good. Like, I'm really glad that he brought it up, because what it's done is it's caused me to re-examine my motives and dig deeper in my faith and into the scriptures, and it's been a good experience. But it wasn't because of a compliment. It's because someone was critical. Like, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to have those kinds of conversations where we disagree about things. But I was thinking back through my life about situations, that were extremely painful, and the big ones that came to mind. And so now this first one's a little bit silly, but it was big to me. Like, I remember in 7th grade when I didn't make the boys basketball team. And I remember, like, being crushed. Like, I can still picture standing in the hallway, looking at the list of paper, everyone else crowded around, and not seeing my name on it. And that was crushing for me. I remember not wanting to go back to school. I remember after college, there was this job I really wanted, and I made it to the second round of interviews, and I went down to Texas to interview, and I went through a couple of interviews, and I got back the next day, and I remember I was in my car, parked somewhere, and this phone call came in, and it was from the HR person. And I remember them saying, "Thank you, Scott, for coming down to see us and spending time with us and interviewing. However, we've made a decision to go in a different way." I remember that. I remember when my wife and I, we were a couple years into our marriage, and we were starting to get to that season of families and kids, and biologically, we were just having trouble having kids, and going to the doctors and trying to figure all that out, and not getting any answers, and there not being a reason why we weren't, like, pregnant and kids weren't happening, and just remembering, like, God, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with us? Where are you, God? I remember a couple years ago, I put this proposal together that I was excited about, and it got rejected, and just remembering going through that rejection and that experience. And maybe you're somewhere similar right now, and you don't see the point in what you're going through, and you're discouraged, or you're overwhelmed. Maybe you're tempted even to give up. Maybe you're crying out, "God, where are you?" Or, "Why am I going through this?" I wonder if it could be that God's preparation for what's next sometimes comes packaged as pain. See, I believe that God will use your pain to prepare you for your purpose. God will use your pain to prepare you for what is next. God will use your pain to prepare you for the next opportunity that you have, for the next job that you have. God will use your pain to prepare you for the next ministry opportunity. He will use your pain to prepare you for the next level of leadership. He will use your pain in being single to prepare you for when you do have a relationship one day. Right? God will use your pain in this financial struggle to prepare you for when you have sufficient funds one day. God will use your pain to prepare you for your purpose. And I don't know what's next for you, but what I do know is that we have a God that can take what you're in the midst of, and He can use it for your good and for your purpose, if you will allow Him to. I think about the rest of the story. 7th grade, rejected, cut from the basketball team. I wrestled that year. I never wrestled before. And I ended up wrestling through high school. Met my best friend that would become my best friend through high school on the wrestling team. Wouldn't have met him otherwise. And in high school, I ended up having some leadership opportunities on the wrestling team. I don't remember having any leadership opportunities. I never saw myself as a leader before that I wouldn't have had if I didn't join the wrestling team. My job after college, what happened after I got called from HR is I'd been told, someone told me it was good interviewing practice to talk to those that interviewed you to learn what you did poorly, to learn how you can improve and get better. And so I called the two of the managers I interviewed with down in Texas, and I just asked them, like, how can I improve? What can I do better? And they gave me some pointers and some tips. And one of them pointed out this thing I had said that I actually had intended for it to come across as a strength, and it came across as a weakness. And that was, for him, it was a big hang-up. And I was, like, embarrassed. And I was like, "Oh, man, that's not what I meant." And I kind of explained what I meant. But I was so grateful because it gave me something to learn from and something I knew next time I would deliver that differently. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the same HR person. They said, "Scott, we've never done this before, but we've changed our mind, and we want to extend you an offer." And I remember what I learned about grit and perseverance, but more importantly, just seeing God's hand in the midst of that. Like, it grew my faith, and I matured my faith in ways that if I would have just gotten off it, it would have never happened. Courtney and I, many of you know, we ended up adopting 3 children. And we always had wanted to adopt, but we ended up doing it sooner, and I don't know if we would have adopted 3. But now, where I am today, looking back, I can honestly say I would not have wanted it to turn out any differently. Like, I love our story, and I love how God weaved our family together and used adoption as part of our story and our legacy. And then the proposal that got rejected a couple years ago, I'm in a different place now than I would be otherwise. And just over this past week, like couple weeks, people have said, Scott, you're exactly where you should be. Like, you created for this. And it's such a rewarding and fruitful season that I'm in right now. And see, none of that would have happened if I wouldn't have gone through the pain. God's preparation comes packaged as pain. Could it be that the very next thing God is preparing you to do next, He is preparing you for at this very moment? And we see this throughout the Bible. Joseph, remember Joseph, if you remember his story, he had a bunch of brothers, and his brothers were jealous of him, and so they betrayed him. They locked him in a pit, and then they sold him off to slave traders, and he became a slave. And then later he was falsely accused of a horrendous crime, and all of that, why? Because God was instilling him deep roots and a genuine faith and preparing him and building his confidence, because later he would become the second most powerful person in his country. David. Some of you think you have it hard at work. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but some of you have it hard. Some of you think you have a difficult boss. David worked for a man that was jealous of him, and he literally tried to kill him by throwing spears at him. And then he chased him throughout the country, trying to catch him and kill him. David had to fight bears and lions. Why? Because God was preparing him, because next, David would face a giant named Goliath, and David would defeat Goliath. This little boy, the teenage boy would defeat Goliath, and later would become the greatest king Israel had ever had. Because his pain was preparing him for his purpose, just like your pain is preparing you for your purpose. Could it be that the trials and the difficulty and the trouble that they're happening in your life, not to weaken your faith, but to make you stronger? Could it be that it's not really pain, but it's more like preparation? And I want to challenge you today to change your perspective of what it is you're going through if you're in a season of struggle. I want you to think about, you weren't turned down for that job. No, you're being toughened up. I want you to realize that offense, that person that offended you, that's strengthening, that's purifying your heart, that's cleansing your soul. The loneliness that you experience right now because you're single or because you're alone, I want you to realize that this is a season of preparation where you can connect with God in a way that you wouldn't be able to connect with them if you were not single. The betrayal that your good friend betrayed you and it's been painful, what that's doing is that's expanding your capacity to love and forgive. The setback you've gone through, this isn't the end. I want you to realize that setback, I want you to tell yourself, no, that setback, that's actually a setup to see God show up and show off. That setup is creating an opportunity for God to see God work in a way that he wouldn't otherwise or couldn't otherwise. See, there's always a purpose in your pain. God never wastes a hurt. Pain proves your faith. Pain prepares you for purpose. God never promised that someone wouldn't gossip about you. God never promised that your girlfriend or boyfriend wouldn't break up with you. God never promised that you wouldn't go through some health struggles. God never promised that your child wouldn't rebel or dabble in drugs. God would never promise that you wouldn't face bankruptcy or a divorce. God never promised that you wouldn't get laid off or you wouldn't get rejected in a job interview. What does he promise? Well, Jesus promises, he says, in this world you're going to have trouble. But I want you to take heart. I've overcome the world. You're going to grieve, but I can turn your grief to joy. Because your pain is going to prove your faith, and your pain is going to prepare you for your purpose.